Alagaddupama Sutta. The simile of the cobra. So I have heard. At one time the Buddha was staying near Svarth in Jeta's Grove, Anthapikares Monastery. Now at that time a mendicant called Araha, who had previously been a vulture trapper, had the following harmful misconception: for vulture trapper, Gardahi, CSN 47.7:1. Where square root BA with macron DH clearly means to trap the monkey. The commentary's killer seems unjustified. As I understand the Buddha's teaching, the acts that he says are obstructions are not really obstructions for the one who performs them. By this he denies the third of the four kinds of self-assurance, MN 12 minutes and 25.1 seconds. Several mendicants heard about this. They went up to Araha and said to him, "Is it really true, Reverend Araha, that you have such a harmful misconception? As I understand the Buddha's teaching, the acts that he says are obstructions are not really obstructions for the one who performs them." "Absolutely, Reverence. As I understand the Buddha's teaching, the acts that he says are obstructions are not really obstructions for the one who performs them." Then, wishing to dissuade Araha from his view, the mendicants pursued, pressed, and grilled him. The stock phrase pursued, pressed, and grilled, Samanuyanjanti Samanuganti Samanubsanti, is sometimes rendered as if it meant to question, but here there is no question. While these terms are commonly used in a context of questioning, they do not, in and of themselves, mean to question. Rather they mean to engage with a person and push for an answer or response. Don't say that, Araha. Don't misrepresent the Buddha, for misrepresentation of the Buddha is not good. And the Buddha would not say that. Araha makes two mistakes: misunderstanding sensual pleasures, and misrepresenting the Buddha. In many ways the Buddha has said that obstructive acts are obstructive, and that they really do obstruct the one who performs them. Araha did not specify what obstructions he was referring to, but this reply by the mendicants indicates that he meant indulgence in sensual pleasures, a conclusion supported by the commentary and several parallel texts. See 2 Thig 16.1:45.2, where sensual pleasures are said to be obstructive. Other things said to be obstructive are possessions, honor, and popularity, e.g. SN 17.2:1.2, and false speech, KD 2:3.3.14. In the latter context, obstructive is explained as preventing the attainment of jhana and higher spiritual realizations. The Buddha says that sensual pleasures give little gratification and much suffering and distress, and they are all the more full of drawbacks. With the similes of a skeleton. The first 7 of these 10 similes are taught with explanations at MN 54 minutes and 15.1 seconds. The full 10 are quoted at AN 5.76:11.2 and by the Bhikkhu Sumed at Thig 16.1:41.1. With slight variations, the list recurs in various parallels, and some similes are found individually. A scrap of meat, a grass torch, a pit of glowing coals, a dream, borrowed goods, fruit on a tree, the butcher's knife and chopping board, swords and spears, the snake's head. The Buddha says that sensual pleasures give little gratification and much suffering and distress, and they are all the more full of drawbacks. But even though the mendicants pursued, pressed, and grilled him in this way, Araha obstinately stuck to his misconception and insisted on it. When they weren't able to dissuade Araha from his view, the mendicants went to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and told him what had happened. So the Buddha addressed one of the monks, "Please, monk, in my name tell the mendicant Araha, formerly a vulture trapper, that the teacher summons him." "Yes, sir," that monk replied. He went to Araha and said to him, "Reverend Araha, the teacher summons you." "Yes, Reverend," Araha replied. He went to the Buddha, bowed, and sat down to one side. The Buddha said to him, "Is it really true, Araha, that you have such a harmful misconception? As I understand the Buddha's teaching, the acts that he says are obstructions are not really obstructions for the one who performs them." Absolutely, sir. As I understand the Buddha's teaching, the acts that he says are obstructions are not really obstructions for the one who performs them. Absolutely renders the particle bya with macron, which is a rare intensive form of eva. It is employed in the same manner by Sti at mn 38 minutes and 3.7 seconds, who is equally confident and equally wrong. Futile man, who on earth have you ever known me to teach in that way? Haven't I said in many ways that obstructive acts are obstructive, and that they really do obstruct the one who performs them? I've said that sensual pleasures give little gratification and much suffering and distress, and they are all the more full of drawbacks. With the similes of a skeleton, a scrap of meat, a grass torch, a pit of glowing coals, a dream, borrowed goods, fruit on a tree, the butcher's knife and chopping board, swords and spears, a snake's head, I've said that sensual pleasures give little gratification and much suffering and distress, and they are all the more full of drawbacks. But still you misrepresent me by your wrong grasp, harm yourself, and create much wickedness. This will be for your lasting harm and suffering. The discourse up to this point is also found twice in the Vinaya. At BUPC 68 the Buddha makes it a confessable offense to persistently insist on a pernicious wrong view of this sort. At KD 11:32.1.1 the Buddha asks the Sangha to perform an act of suspension, or dejection, ukkipaniyakama, against Araha. This portion is also found in the parallel Vinayas of the Dharmaguptaka, Kayapya, Marsgika, Masaka, Mlasavstivda, and Savstivda schools. Then the Buddha said to the mendicants, "What do you think, mendicants? Has this mendicant Araha kindled even a spark of order in this teaching and training?" Kindled even a spark of order renders usmkatopi, found in a similar context at mn 38 minutes and 6.3 seconds. USM elsewhere appears as bodily warmth, mn 43 minutes and 22.9 seconds, compared to Brahmastra the 4th of February, 11, or the initial heating of fire sticks when rubbed together, mn 140 or 19.13. But the most pertinent context is JA 526:55.4, where a young ascetic will swiftly lose their uskata, explained by the commentary as the fire of an ascetic, samataja, should they fall prey to sensual temptation. Thus, drawing on the traditional imagery of tapas as heat and fervor, it refers to the kindling of ascetic order. It never became a technical term in Pali, but in Sanskrit abhidharma, umagata refers to the conjunction of radiant sandhi with wisdom in the initial realization of the truths, which burns up the defilements, Abhidharmako Abhya 6.17, Abhidharmasamakaya 2.4. How could that be, sir? No, sir. When this was said, Araha sat silent, dismayed, shoulders drooping, downcast, depressed, with nothing to say. Knowing this, the Buddha said, "Futile man, you will be known by your own harmful misconception. I'll question the mendicants about this." Then the Buddha said to the mendicants, "Mendicants, do you understand my teaching as Araha does, when he misrepresents me by his wrong grasp, harms himself, and creates much wickedness?" No, sir. For in many ways the Buddha has told us that obstructive acts are obstructive, and that they really do obstruct the one who performs them. The Buddha has said that sensual pleasures give little gratification and much suffering and distress, and they are all the more full of drawbacks. With the similes of a skeleton, a snake's head, the Buddha has said that sensual pleasures give little gratification and much suffering and distress, and they are all the more full of drawbacks. Good, mendicants. It's good that you understand my teaching like this. For in many ways I have said that obstructive acts are obstructive. I've said that sensual pleasures give little gratification and much suffering and distress, and they are all the more full of drawbacks. But still this Araha misrepresents me by his wrong grasp, harms himself, and creates much wickedness. This will be for his lasting harm and suffering. Truly, mendicants, it is quite impossible to perform sensual acts without sensual desires, sensual perceptions, and sensual thoughts. According to the commentary, this refers to sexual intercourse. This sentence is not found in the Chinese parallel at MA 200. Take a futile person who memorize the teaching, statements, mixed prose and verse, discussions, verses, inspired exclamations, legends, stories of past lives, amazing stories, and elaborations. These 9 categories, Aga, of the teaching were an early organization of the Dhamma before the system of Nikyas, or Gamas, was introduced at the First Council. While their exact specification is uncertain, in my view they are most likely as follows, with an example of each. Sutta is short doctrinal statements, SN 12.1. Gaya is mixed prose and verse, Prasimitra, SN 1.1. Vaikara is questions and answers, MN 22. Ga with Macron Tha with Macron is pure verse, Thig 1.1. Udna is the inspired statements identified as such in the early texts, MN 75:19.1. Itivuttaka perhaps means legends of the past, DN 27, rather than the book of that name, ITI 1. Jataka are the past life stories of the Buddha found in the early texts, MN 81. Abhuttadhamma are stories of the amazing qualities of the Buddha or disciples, MN 123. Vedala are detailed analytical elaborations, MN 43. Once the system of Agas fell into disuse, some names were reproposed as specific books, Udna, Itivuttaka, Jataka. Northern traditions, including the parallels to this passage, usually extend the list to 12 with the addition of Nidna, background stories, Apadna, past lives of disciples, and Upadesa, explanatory treatises, but they don't examine the meaning of those teachings with wisdom, and so don't come to an acceptance of them after deliberation. Considered acceptance is Nijnakamanti, they memorize the teaching for the sake of finding fault and winning debates. This theme is expanded in several discourses of the Ahakavagga, such as SNP 4.8. They don't realize the goal for which they memorized them. Because they're wrongly grasped, those teachings lead to their lasting harm and suffering. Why is that? Because of their wrong grasp of the teachings. Bhadrayaka Upanishad, the 4th of April, 10 says that those who worship ignorance enter darkness, but those who love knowledge, Veda, enter even greater darkness. This is a recurring theme. For example, Chandogya Upanishad 6.1.2 tells how Adlaka saw the vanity of his son Svetaketu when he returned from his schooling. Suppose there was a person in need of a cobra. And while wandering in search of a cobra, the alligator appears only here in early Pali. Sanskrit sources identify alligator either as a water snake, in which case, however, it is said to be non-venomous, Krasmin S. Amarakudgana 1.7.5, or as a kind of cobra, Davkra, Saruta Sahit 5.4. As to why the man was looking for a cobra, the commentary says he was looking to harvest the snake's venom. But Candrakoti, drawing on the Pan-Indic legend that certain serpents have a snake gem, Ngamai, in their heads, says that a serpent captured with the proper herbs and incantations brings great riches, but should these fail it will turn deadly. Mlamadhyamakaftipраsanapad, L. de la Valley Pausin's translation, page 497. They'd see a big cobra, and grasp it by the coil or the tail. But that cobra would twist back and bite them on the hand or the arm or other major or minor limb, resulting in death or deadly pain. Why is that? Because of their wrong grasp of the cobra. In the same way, a futile person memorized the teaching, and those teachings lead to their lasting harm and suffering. Why is that? Because of their wrong grasp of the teachings. Now, take a gentleman who memorized the teaching, statements, mixed prose and verse, discussions, verses, inspired exclamations, legends, stories of past lives, amazing stories, and elaborations. And once he's memorized them, he examines their meaning with wisdom, and comes to an acceptance of them after deliberation. This is the follower of teachings, Dhammasri, who is mentioned near the end of the sutta. He doesn't memorize the teaching for the sake of finding fault and winning debates. He realizes the goal for which he memorized them. Because they are correctly grasped, those teachings lead to his lasting welfare and happiness. Why is that? Because of his correct grasp of the teachings. Suppose there was a person in need of a cobra. And while wandering in search of a cobra, they'd see a big cobra and hold it down carefully with a cleft stick. Only then would they correctly grasp it by the neck. And even though that cobra might wrap its coils around that person's hand or arm or some other major or minor limb, that wouldn't result in death or deadly pain. Why is that? Because of their correct grasp of the cobra. In the same way, a gentleman memorized the teaching, and those teachings lead to his lasting welfare and happiness. Why is that? Because of his correct grasp of the teachings. So, mendicants, when you understand what I've said, you should remember it accordingly. But if I've said anything that you don't understand, you should ask me about it, or some competent mendicants. As in, for example, MN 18. Mendicants, I will teach you a simile of the teaching as a raft, for crossing over, not for holding on. This is the second renowned simile introduced in this discourse. It is referenced by name in MN 38 minutes and 14.1 second. Metaphors of flood and crossing rivers abound in the Buddha's teaching, and the specific idea of using a raft to cross over recurs at UD 8.6:27 equals DN 16:1.33.2 equals KD 6:28.12.7, SNP 1.2:4.1, SN 35.238:5.6. Listen and apply your mind well. I will speak. Yes, sir, they replied. The Buddha said this. Suppose there was a person traveling along the road. They'd see a large deluge, whose near shore was dubious and perilous, while the far shore was a sanctuary free of peril. But there was no ferry boat or bridge for crossing over. They'd think, why don't I gather grass, sticks, branches, and leaves and make a raft? Riding on the raft, and paddling with my hands and feet, I can safely reach the far shore. And so they'd do exactly that. And when they'd crossed over to the far shore, they'd think, this raft has been very helpful to me. Riding on the raft, and paddling with my hands and feet, I have safely crossed over to the far shore. Why don't I hoist it on my head or pick it up on my shoulder and go wherever I want? What do you think, mendicants? Would that person be doing what should be done with that raft? No, sir. And what, mendicants, should that person do with the raft? When they'd crossed over, they should think, this raft has been very helpful to me. Why don't I beach it on dry land or set it adrift on the water and go wherever I want? That's what that person should do with the raft. In the same way, I have taught a simile of the teaching as a raft, for crossing over, not for holding on. By understanding the simile of the raft, you will even give up the teachings, let alone what is not the teachings. Dam in the plural refers back to those teachings, tessa damna, of the 9 categories. Accordingly, when this simile is invoked at MN 38 minutes and 14.1 second, it is in reference to views. The pair Dhamma and Adhamma usually means the teaching, and what is not the teaching, e.g. and 2.104. Just as the positive form, however, means more than just teaching, but rather a teaching of natural and moral truth, the negative form implies there is something unnatural, in conflict with the way the world is. Mendicants, there are these 6 grounds for views. Grounds for views, dehini, are the experiences or reasoning from which views are derived. The Buddha is explaining how Ariha fell into his wrong view. One of the purposes of this analysis is to show how, while divergent views might seem insightful, innovative, or courageous, they all fall back on the same basic fallacies. What 6? Take an unlearned ordinary person who has not seen the noble ones, and is neither skilled nor trained in the teaching of the noble ones. They've not seen true persons, and are neither skilled nor trained in the teaching of the true persons. They regard form as, this is mine, I am this is myself. The misguided person assumes that one or other of the aggregates is their self. In modern times, the teaching of the aggregates is often presented as a reductive argument. What you take to be yourself is in fact just the aggregates. But the Buddha's point is, rather, the aggregates that you take to be yourself do not have the properties of a self, namely permanence, etc. They also regard feeling, perception, choices, whatever is seen, heard, thought, known, attained, sought, and explored by the mind as, this is mine, I am this is myself. Standing in place of the fifth aggregate, consciousness, this includes all kinds of knowledge or spiritual wisdom, especially that gained through mysticism or meditation. And as for this ground for views, the cosmos and the self are one and the same. After death I will be that, permanent, everlasting, eternal, imperishable, and will last forever and ever. This is a both view and a ground for views. Such views, lacking empirical basis, have something dissatisfying about them, so adherent is driven to develop more and more complex metaphysical abstractions. At DN 1:1.30.1, this is treated as an eternalist view that arises from the grounds of either recollection of past lives or logic. The repeated demonstrative pronouns in the Pali so loco so at, literally, this is the cosmos, this is the self, affirm an emphatic and absolute identity. The cosmos and the self are one and the same. This phrase has a lexical parallel at Bhadrayaka Upanishad the 4th of April, 22, which argues for the renunciate life. What can descendants do for those for whom the self and the cosmos are one and the same? Ayampmaya loka. See also the last words of a father to his son at the 1st of May, 17, you are divinity, you are the sacrifice, you are the cosmos, TVA Brahma TVA Yajnas TVA Loka. In this passage the terms at and loco are reversed, presumably by textual error. It does not affect the meaning. They regard this also as, this is mine, I am this is myself. But a learned noble disciple has seen the noble ones, and is skilled and trained in the teaching of the noble ones. They've seen true persons, and are skilled and trained in the teaching of the true persons. They regard form like this is not mine, I am not this is not myself. They also regard feeling, perception, choices, whatever is seen, heard, thought, known, attained, sought, and explored by the mind like this is not mine, I am not this is not myself. And the same for this ground for views, the cosmos and the self are one and the same. After death I will be that, permanent, everlasting, eternal, imperishable, and will last forever and ever. They also regard like this is not mine, I am not this is not myself. Seeing in this way they're not anxious about what doesn't exist. What does not exist, asati, is the self. To be anxious, paratasati, is to be caught between desire and fear. It seems to be a word of specifically Buddhist usage, leaning equally on the root square root tras, to tremble in fear, and square root t, to thirst for or crave. When he said this, one of the mendicants asked the Buddha, Sir, can there be anxiety about what doesn't exist externally? By adding externally the focus is shifted from the self to what belongs to the self, namely possessions. However, the Chinese parallel at MA 200 apparently takes it in reference to the anxiety of an eternalist who hears the Buddha teaching externally. There can, mendicant, said the Buddha. It's when someone thinks, oh, it once was mine but is mine no more. Oh, it could be mine but I do not get it. They sorrow and wail and lament, beating their breast and falling into confusion. That's how there is anxiety about what doesn't exist externally. But can there be no anxiety about what doesn't exist externally? There can, mendicant, said the Buddha. It's when someone doesn't think, oh, it once was mine but is mine no more. Oh, it could be mine but I do not get it. They don't sorrow and wail and lament, beating their breast and falling into confusion. That's how there is no anxiety about what doesn't exist externally. But can there be anxiety about what doesn't exist internally? There can, mendicant, said the Buddha. It's when someone has such a view, the cosmos and the self are one and the same. After death I will be that, permanent, everlasting, eternal, imperishable, and will last forever and ever. They hear the realized one or their disciple teaching Dhamma for the uprooting of all grounds, fixations, obsessions, insistences, and underlying tendencies regarding views, for the stilling of all activities, the letting go of all attachments, the ending of craving, fading away, cessation, extinguishment. The structure of this long compound is revealed at AN 10.96:14.1, which shows that views is not one item on the list, but applies to each item they think, whoa, I'm going to be annihilated and destroyed. I won't even exist anymore. They can only see the extremes. If not eternalism it must be annihilationism. They sorrow and wail and lament, beating their breast and falling into confusion. That's how there is anxiety about what doesn't exist internally. But can there be no anxiety about what doesn't exist internally? There can, said the Buddha. It's when someone doesn't have such a view, the cosmos and the self are one and the same. After death I will be that, permanent, everlasting, eternal, imperishable, and will last forever and ever. They hear the realized one or their disciple teaching Dhamma for the uprooting of all grounds, fixations, obsessions, insistences, and underlying tendencies regarding views, for the stilling of all activities, the letting go of all attachments, the ending of craving, fading away, cessation, extinguishment. They don't think, whoa, I'm going to be annihilated and destroyed. I won't even exist anymore. They don't sorrow and wail and lament, beating their breast and falling into confusion. That's how there is no anxiety about what doesn't exist internally. Mendicants, it would make sense to be possessive about something that's permanent, everlasting, eternal, imperishable, and will last forever and ever. But do you see any such possession? No, sir. Good, mendicants. I also can't see any such possession. It would make sense to grasp at a theory of self that didn't give rise to sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress. But do you see any such theory of self? No, sir. Good, mendicants. I also can't see any such theory of self. It would make sense to rely on a view that didn't give rise to sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress. But do you see any such view to rely on? No, sir. Good, mendicants. I also can't see any such view to rely on. Mendicants, were a self to exist, would there be the thought, belonging to myself? Yes, sir. Were what belongs to a self to exist, would there be the thought, myself? Yes, sir. But since a self and what belongs to a self are not actually found, is not the following a totally foolish teaching? Not actually found renders Sakkato Thetato Anupalabhamni. The cosmos and the self are one and the same. After death I will be that, permanent, everlasting, eternal, imperishable, and will last forever and ever? How could it not, sir? It's a totally foolish teaching. What do you think, mendicants? The following question and answer section is quoted verbatim from the Alagaddupama Sutta, SN 22.59:6.1. It appears twice elsewhere in the Majjhima, MN 35 minutes and 20.4 seconds, MN 109:15.1, in the Vinaya, KD 1:6.42.1, and about 50 times in the Sutta. Is form permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, sir. But if it's impermanent, is it suffering or happiness? Suffering, sir. But if it's impermanent, suffering, and perishable, is it fit to be regarded thus, this is mine, I am this is myself? No, sir. What do you think, mendicants? Is feeling, perception, choices, consciousness permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, sir. But if it's impermanent, is it suffering or happiness? Suffering, sir. But if it's impermanent, suffering, and perishable, is it fit to be regarded thus, this is mine, I am this is myself? No, sir. So, mendicants, you should truly see any kind of form at all, past, future, or present, internal or external, solid or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, all form, with right understanding, this is not mine, I am not this is not myself. You should truly see any kind of feeling, perception, choices, consciousness at all, past, future, or present, internal or external, solid or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, all consciousness, with right understanding, this is not mine, I am not this is not myself. Seeing this, a learned noble disciple grows disillusioned with form, feeling, perception, choices, and consciousness. Being disillusioned, desire fades away. When desire fades away, they're freed. When they're freed, they know they're freed. They understand, rebirth is ended, the spiritual journey has been completed, what had to be done has been done, there is nothing further for this place. Such a mendicant is one who is called, one who has lifted the crossbar, one who has filled in the moat, one who has pulled up the pillar, one who is unimpeded, and also a noble one with banner lowered and burden dropped, detached. These similes recur at AN 5.71 and AN 5.72. They reflect ideas of entrapment and freedom. And how has a mendicant raised the crossbar? Ignorance is a hindrance, Nvara, an image that ultimately draws on the Vedic myth of Vtra, a giant constrictor who trapped the waters, and sometimes cattle and sun, in darkness until it was slain by Indra and the waters released. Removing the bar permits escape from entrapment. At Chandogya Upanishad 2.2 for point 6, it is said that a devoted sacrificer may, at the time of death, pray that the crossbar blocking entry to the next world be removed. It's when a mendicant has given up ignorance, cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, obliterated it, so it's unable to arise in the future. That's how a mendicant has lifted the crossbar. And how has a mendicant filled in the moat? An elephant may be trapped by a moat Karyapiyaka 11 minutes and 3.1 second, so when it is filled in it may roam free. It's when a mendicant has given up transmigrating through births in future lives, cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, obliterated it, so it's unable to arise in the future. That's how a mendicant has filled in the moat. And how has a mendicant pulled up the pillar? Likewise, an elephant may be tethered to a pillar, MN 125:12.11, Thag 19.1:51.2, Karyapiyaka 11 minutes and 3.2 seconds. The term for pillars here, Essek, also serves as a pun for search, Eason. Two of the three searches, sensual pleasures and continued existence, SN 45.161, overlap with two of the three cravings. It's when a mendicant has given up craving, cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, obliterated it, so it's unable to arise in the future. That's how a mendicant has pulled up the pillar. And how is a mendicant unimpeded? Giving up the 5 lower fetters, thus becoming a non-returner, makes you unbarred, niraga. This is also the name of a Vedic sacrifice, SN 3.9:4.3, where it is probably a name for the horse sacrifice, during which the horse is set free to roam for a year. It's when a mendicant has given up the 5 lower fetters, cut them off at the root, made them like a palm stump, obliterated them, so they're unable to arise in the future. That's how a mendicant is unimpeded. And how is a mendicant a noble one with banner lowered and burden dropped, detached? A banner is held aloft as a sign of identity. At SN 22.22, the burden is said to be the 5 aggregates, and the burden is put down with the end of craving. It's when a mendicant has given up the conceit I am, cut it off at the root, made it like a palm stump, obliterated it, so it's unable to arise in the future. That's how a mendicant is a noble one with banner lowered and burden dropped, detached. When a mendicant's mind was freed like this, the gods together with Indra, the divinity, and the progenitor, search as they may, will not discover. This expression conveys a deep sense of wonder when faced with a state of meditative consciousness so profound that its basis is unknown. AN 11.9:3.15, SN 22.79:14.26. The basis is that on which consciousness depends, which fuels it and keeps it going. All such dependencies have been uprooted. This is the basis of that realized one's consciousness. Realized one, Targata, usually refers to the Buddha, but sometimes, as here, it applies to any arahant. Why is that? Because even in this very life the realized one is not found, I say. Here a not found renders ananavidya, whereas at MN 22 minutes and 25.5 seconds above it rendered anupalapamna. Both terms refer to the self that is not discovered or discoverable. Though I state and assert this, certain ascetics and Brahmins misrepresent me with the incorrect, hollow, false, untruthful claim. The ascetic Gautama is an exterminator. He advocates the annihilation, eradication, and obliteration of an existing being. This is the annihilationist view, exemplified by Ajita of the hair blanket, DN 2 minutes and 22.1 second, and referred to above at MN 22:20.7. They misrepresent me as what I am not, and saying what I do not say. In the past, as today, what I describe is suffering and the cessation of suffering. The particle siva here has its normal role of slight emphasis in conjunctions, and so this phrase does not mean, I only teach suffering and the end of suffering. The point, rather, is that when he speaks of cessation, it is the cessation of suffering, not the cessation of an existing being. But this being so, if others abuse, attack, harass, and trouble the realized one, he doesn't get resentful, bitter, and emotionally exasperated. Or if others honor, respect, revere, or venerate him, he doesn't get thrilled, elated, and emotionally excited. The Buddha teaches a similar equanimity at DN 1:1.5.1. If they praise him, he just thinks, they do such things for me regarding what in the past was completely understood. Read Tatami regarding that for me rather than commentaries Tata, me regarding that for these aggregates. The latter reading is supported by BJT's Tatrime, but I think this is probably a back reading from the commentary. In the parallel phrase for the monks below, we would expect Tata no, which is in fact attested in the Tie and Points editions, so I translate us accordingly. So, mendicants, if others abuse, attack, harass, and trouble you, don't make yourselves resentful, bitter, and emotionally exasperated. Or if others honor, respect, revere, or venerate you, don't make yourselves thrilled, elated, and emotionally excited. If they praise you, just think, they do such things for us regarding what in the past was completely understood. This seems out of place here, for completely understood refers to arahantship, yet as a general teaching this should include everyone. In the Chinese parallel at MA 200, after being abused, one reflects that it is due to past deeds, and after being praised, one reflects that it is due to present knowledge and elimination of defilements. Anleo, Comparative Study, pp 56-7, suggests that the Pali phrase Pubbiparenta might be a conflation of these two ideas due to a textual confusion which also left the Pali without a reflection on being abused. While this must remain conjectural, it is a neat explanation for the several doctrinal and textual problems of this passage. So, mendicants, give up what isn't yours. This passage is found in several other suttas such as SN 22.33, and applied to the six senses at SN 35.101. Giving it up will be for your lasting welfare and happiness. And what isn't yours? Form isn't yours, give it up. Giving it up will be for your lasting welfare and happiness. Feeling, perception, choices, consciousness isn't yours, give it up. Giving it up will be for your lasting welfare and happiness. What do you think, mendicants? Suppose a person was to carry off the grass, sticks, branches, and leaves in this Jeta's grove, or burn them, or do what they want with them. Would you think this person is carrying us off, burning us, or doing what they want with us? No, sir. Why is that? Because to us that's neither self nor belonging to self. In the same way, mendicants, give up what isn't yours. Giving it up will be for your lasting welfare and happiness. And what isn't yours? Form, feeling, perception, choices, consciousness isn't yours, give it up. Giving it up will be for your lasting welfare and happiness. Thus the teaching has been well explained by me, made clear, opened, illuminated, and stripped of patchwork. Also at SN 12.22:2.1. Stripped of patchwork, Chinnapalotika, because, while the Dhamma has many and varied aspects, they all form a unified whole, not just scraps sewn together. In this teaching there are mendicants who are perfected, who have ended the defilements, completed the spiritual journey, done what had to be done, laid down the burden, achieved their own goal, utterly ended the fetter of continued existence, and are rightly freed through enlightenment. For them, there is no cycle of rebirths to be found. For the phrase no cycle of rebirths to be found, var tessa nathai panya panya, compare DN 15 minutes and 22.6 seconds. In this teaching there are mendicants who have given up the 5 lower fetters. All of them are reborn spontaneously. They are extinguished there, and are not liable to return from that world. The qualifier all of them, sabati, here and below, is not found in similar passages. In this teaching there are mendicants who, having given up 3 fetters, and weakened greed, hate, and delusion, are once returners. All of them come back to this world once only, then make an end of suffering. In this teaching there are mendicants who have ended 3 fetters. All of them are stream-enterers, not liable to be reborn in the underworld, bound for awakening. In this teaching there are mendicants who are followers of teachings, or followers by faith. All of them are bound for awakening. A follower of teachings is someone who accepts the teachings after reflecting on them with wisdom, while a follower by faith accepts the teachings due to their confidence in the teacher. They are both considered to be a practicing to realize the fruit of stream entry, sot patiphala sakchakiriya paipano, and, with the maturing of their faculties, SN 48.18:1.5, will assuredly attain stream entry in this life, SN 25.1. Thus the teaching has been well explained by me, made clear, opened, illuminated, and stripped of patchwork. In this teaching there are those who have a degree of faith and love for me. All of them are bound for heaven. Sadmata, a degree of faith, is to be distinguished from Sadmatika, mere faith. The former is sufficient for one to progress in the path, MN 70:21.2, but with the latter one just gets by, MN 65:28.7. That is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, the mendicants approved what the Buddha said.